Okay, so now you can see the ticker below. It says starting in X seconds. So it's
Yeah.
after that it will change to the live on the bottom left, which means our feed is live.
Okay.
A very good morning and warm welcome to everyone for this session by T Hub and a very interesting panel discussion about tracking KPIs and managing teams remotely. I have Mr. Samir, director from T Hub here. I would like to just ask and request if you are able to hear and see us. If you are not able to hear and see us, please put it in the chat box. In case of these issues, we have often seen that there are browser caching issues that people often see. So please refresh if you are not able to see once. If that does not work, please close your browser and come back here. Okay, with that request, I would like to hand over to Samir to get going here.
Great. Thanks, Prashant. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. Uh, I really, it's good to see the whole innovation ecosystem getting together in the times of a challenging time. And I think we chose an interesting topic for you. This is part of a webinar series that THUB plans to conduct and kind of interact with the whole innovation ecosystem of the country and the world, and pick up topics which are relevant for entrepreneurs and startups. Maybe this is a good time for all of us to get together and handle and talk about some certain kind of issues and problems that startups would normally not pick it up, and gets overshadowed with a lot of other day-to-day working things. So today's topic of tracking your KPIs and managing teams remotely, trying to make sure that the teams are working together for a common goal, uh, and how to make it happen when, especially when we're all in lockdown and working remotely. So without taking further time, I would like to introduce you to the panel that we have today. So I'll quickly introduce Amit. Maybe I should quickly introduce myself first. So I'm Samir. I work with I'm the senior director for marketing and business management here, and I work with 20 plus years with different corporates and startups before I landed here. Um, you'll see a lot of common threads here. Of course, Microsoft being the common thread between many of our panelists. So maybe I'll quickly ask Amit to introduce himself. Amit,
Thanks. Thanks. Hope everyone can hear me well on this.
yeah.
A little bit of a brief introduction. I spent a long time working for Microsoft and some other IT companies before that. And since September of last year, I have been working with the startup ecosystem fairly aggressively. I'm on the board and mentor a few companies, of course, associated with T-Hub and D Labs. And I'm thrilled to be speaking with you today. Thanks, Amit.
Okay, thanks, Amit. So I'll also request the before I go to Ravi, I would request the startup founders who are in the call today. So Anand, you want to give a quick intro about yourself, and then we'll.
Sure. I'm Anand. I've been in the software industry for the past 20 years, building products and consulting services and around them. So all of that, as you know, mostly with remote teams, distributed across geographies and different time zones. So working on that. And for the past 3 years, we are actually building a low-code development platform ourselves, which actually takes a lot of assumptions that teams are distributed and working together from different locations. So that's what I do.
Great, thanks.
Hi everyone. Super happy, super excited to be here. Like I'm in front of everyone. So I've been working with GoScale. So I'm the founder CEO of GoScale. So we are a 150 plus team operating from the last 3 years, spread across Bangalore. Very interestingly, we are one of the early guys in India who went remote much earlier, 3 years back, right? So personally, I have been a remote engineer, worked with companies like Genesis, traveled across Europe, 40 plus countries, working as a digital nomad over the last 4 years. So super excited to catch up with you guys, understand how you guys are coping up with the recent work from home and remote culture, what's happening and all, and happy to share my insights over the journey.
Great, thanks, Raghu. So yeah, I request Ravi to introduce himself and also kind of lead us into this session with his keynote on this, please. So we'll start with Ravi introducing and speaking about. Uh,
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's very happy to be here with all of you. We're all locked up in our houses and trying to cope with the new changes that are happening around us. So this is my quarantine look, if you can see. So if you're disappointed by seeing my nice picture on the webinar invitation and the way I really look, I'm sorry about that. Something that we have to deal with. Um, I've been an entrepreneur, I've been an investor, I've been a mentor, I've worked for large corporates such as Microsoft, helping them build their corporate innovation program, their startup programs, and so on. Now I'm leading the charge at T Hub, and this is a good time for us to have a conversation about how are we continuing to recreate ourselves, reimagine ourselves at T Hub and become more relevant to our stakeholders, the startups, the corporates, the government partners of ours, and so on and so forth. So, in this regard, what we find is, there is a lot of anxiety with the uncertainty that it's being created all across, the globe. So there are three buckets that we try to put these things into. So there is one bucket where we have, those existential crises, as in what's happening, what is this a new normal? A lot of those kinds of questions, both personal and for startup founders and startup employees, as to what is going on around them, get a grasp around that. So we get a lot of those kinds of webinars these days, and a lot of hundreds of them that are going around. And no, we are also participating in a lot of those. So that is one, and as in the existential crisis kind of a thing. Then there is another one where what a lot of startups had taken for granted, as that whenever we meet, we're going to go figure this thing out because we meet anyway. We're going to have these informal conversations. Structures are not necessarily very, very well defined. A lot of planning is done pretty much ad hoc, so that there is creativity and there is also that flexibility and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the endoskeleton that is necessary for any organization to actually succeed is missing. At the extent of it's saying it is coming in the way of creativity. So those are the concerns that the second bucket of seminars address. And the third one is about going back to the drawing board, because the demand for the products and the services that startups are building are pretty much disappearing, or at least there is so much uncertainty around them that it's almost calling into question the viability of the startup, and therefore their current business models that they are working on. So, so there is a few 16 or 18 of them that we are working on in that area. Second has about a few dozens of companies that we are looking at, and interacting with, and there are hundreds of companies in the first category. So, this seminar, this
Hi, I think we're having some bandwidth issues on Ravi's end. I hope you guys can still hear me.
Samir is. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes, Samir.
Ravi, no, Ravi, we lost you for a moment.
Yeah.
You joined back, I think. Yes, we can see you now. So please.
Okay. Yeah. So I lost some of you. So I don't know where you lost me, but there are three categories of companies that we are beginning to work with. One set of startups are going through more of an existential crisis. The second are trying to create certain structures so that they can continue to work from home, business continuity, and those kinds of issues are being addressed. And the last one is around, going back to the basics and, business canvas analysis, market analysis, strategy, and so on and so forth, because the demand is not that clear, even after this whole thing settles down. So all of these things we are looking at. As you can imagine, the third category has just a few companies at this point in time that we can cater to. Second has a few dozens, and several hundreds that we are trying to address through a webinar kind of a method as we go along. So this particular webinar is about the second category at this point in time. So a lot of people bristle at the idea of actually having a structure. You'll say, oh, then we are very corporatish. And so, as though being corporate is bad, and that's the reason you left that corporate to begin with and to start this company. And while some of that may be true to the extent that it becomes very onerous on your creativity and your flexibility, yes, but there is a lot to be said about there being some level of processes, structure, and so on and so forth, which is the one that really allows you to be as effective and as efficient as you can.
So Ravi, we're losing you a bit. And I think, yeah, that's another issue which we all are going to face during this work from home and remotely is going to be bandwidth issues.
Yeah, most of the edge routers are kind of maxing out our meetings. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Ravi, you're back. You're back.
Ravi, intermittently, we just lost you for a few seconds here now, but you're back here.
Okay. All right. So what I will do, okay, let me finish this part. So anyway, so yeah, so what we're trying to do, I was also going to show you a presentation, but I guess I'll just do without that. So first of all, I think the startups have run the gamut of all the way from getting a good plan in place, put that in play and there is a certain amount of goal setting that happens so that you have very clear why are you spending this much time, why are you spending your limited resources, what are you going to accomplish at the end of this particular period of time, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of thought to be said about creating that very clear sense of purpose, sense of a plan. So that is the first part. Then the second part is, okay, now that you have that, how do you get it to actually work with the other parts of the organization, right? As in, there are various different pieces of your organization. How does it flow to engineering? How does it flow to marketing? How does it flow to sales? How does it flow to finance? And getting that aligned, and then finally it cascades down to the individual members of the team, and how do you actually make that thing work. So there is this thing called a KPI, a key performance indicator, or a key um, metric that you will track to. So there are ways that you can actually quantify it. Obviously the KPI that you come up with is something that you can measure. So there's a very simple question you can answer saying, hey, have I met that? And the answer should be either yes or a no. That's all. There is no like, hey, work in progress, not happening because of so many things. No, I mean, you are setting the KPIs in such a fashion that you are saying, yes, I've met it, or I've not met it. And that's, there's nothing right or wrong about whether you're not met it, but at the same time, it gives you a very good sense of either your planning was off or your execution was off or whatever, right? So these are the things that we really are trying to use to make this thing happen. And then finally, it helps you to say, well, if those are things are off, you can always go back and revisit and say, how do I really reconfigure those KPIs or reconfigure these things so that I can continue to do what I need to do. And why is this important? So as we were going through this crisis ourselves at T Hub, we began to realize that very soon our team members who also took for granted that they're going to meet every day and they're going to, talk over chai or talk over, in a meeting or so on and so forth, no longer had that luxury anymore. Therefore, we had to have a lot of these things in place so that should they be working from home, we knew exactly whether they were tracking to those KPIs, to those project milestones or not. And therefore, we would be able to, guide them and make sure that we are, taking full advantage of all the resources that we had in hand, and not necessarily have some, some resources be underutilized and other resources being overutilized and so on and so forth. So we really came up with a very defined structure before we kind of found out that indeed there was going to be a lockdown, and each one of us today are working off of those KPIs, and we are able to be very sure, but by the end of the day, what each member of the team has actually done. So there is a form that we share with all our members, so they need to fill it out by 9 p.m. every day. Now, again, 9 p.m. doesn't mean that they are going to be working the same hours as everybody else. They can work anytime they want. I mean, there may be some people who are very good at working in the mornings, and there are other people who will work through the night. That's perfectly fine. So there is now that, additional flexibility that they can, avail of. But by 9 o'clock, you just send it in so that we kind of take a snapshot every 24 hours as to where we are, right? So who knows, you may be asked to wash the dishes, or you may be asked to do something else. So that flexibility remains, but the productivity does not, get affected, right? So we did this, and for us it's still work in progress, but it's working quite well, because I can see that, people are very excited about this very clear set of instructions that they have, and it's not micromanagement as much as they themselves can, key off of these things. The second thing, obviously, is communication. After the structure is in place, we are making sure that we're communicating a lot. Things that you probably would have taken for granted, where you just looked around, you send somebody a WhatsApp message, then you kind of look and see if he has actually seen the WhatsApp message and say, "Hey, see your phone, I've sent you something." Those things are not happening. So, because everybody is working from home, so you make sure that communication is happening, be it formal communication or informal, just no agenda meeting, just having 15 minutes kind of a stand-up meeting, just so that everyone continuing to be part of this thing. And of course, some team meetings, because now I'm saying, in addition to all these dry business stuff that we were able to get away when we met, in face to face, now we have uncovered that, if we really let other people showcase their talent. So there are lots of singers that we have discovered among our team. So in the team meeting, there is a lot of very formal discussions that happen, but we are also asking some people to sing, and which is something that, you wouldn't associate with a business team meeting, but it's beginning to happen. So people feel they are now tuning in, not just for
So nothing to do with their
the
KPIs, but kind of additional secondary KPIs being developed.
exactly,
But yeah,
exactly. So the communication is something that we are beginning to do a lot more of, because none of this can be taken for granted. Because if you're not saying anything, people don't know. They're not reading your body language, or they're not able to get, discern in any other way. So for all these reasons, I think it's important to have this very fundamental structure in place. There is a reporting that comes out of it, and there's also the possibility of having very relevant contextual discussions that can happen. And then you will be amazed at how much enthusiasm that it is generating, once you put this kind of clarity in place, and team building effort that happens on a continual basis, because you're actually putting in energy and time into it. So I just wanted to start this conversation with those opening remarks, and also give you an example of what we are doing at T-Hub today. And I feel that this is a great time for us to step back a couple of steps, take a look at our businesses, take a look at ourselves as individuals, and really see how we can actually reimagine or recreate the future in front of us. As much as it is a cause for anxiety, it's also a cause for huge amount of excitement, because I think the world order as we know it before the crisis is actually going to be broken down, and it's a chance for us in India to build our startup ecosystem at a completely different level and take India to an economic growth that was unprecedented in the past. So all of these things are just waiting for us. We just need to take this opportunity and seize it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi, for setting the context and kind of, of course, giving a broader context as well. And it kind of states that the KPIs are the process of setting some goals, a common goal which the whole organization is working towards, is so critical, anyways, for any organization, and more so in the current times that we are in. So I would like to bring in Amit now, and I would like to ask Amit, how do you, if you can share from your experiences on what is the best way to define these KPIs? Because generally, when we look at these KPIs at an org level, they all have to break down to the individual level. So, what is the process that any of the entrepreneurs who are listening to us can learn on how to kind of set these KPIs and then kind of break down to individuals? Is there a process that to this madness of sorts? If you want to share your thoughts.
Sure, thanks, Amir. And I'll pick up from where Ravi left, which is, I think any crisis. So for some of us, this is new. For me personally, the last 4 years when we transformed our organization at Microsoft, this was, of course, it was voluntary, but it was largely working from home for about 3,500 people in my team spread across 45 countries, and you can imagine how many time zones. So therefore, that's a hugely valuable lesson that we have learned in terms of the things that you have to do differently when you're working remotely, right? Small examples like you cannot get around a coffee machine as easily and discuss things or stand up meetings physically as you would have to. We learned new things. For example, this experience of having your manager remote from your location, even if you had a small office to go to, was a new experience. And through that, we learned the onus on the two things that I think Samir brought out very clearly. Focus on communication. The need to communicate far more intentionally and far more sensitively, because you have to keep in account that there are time zones. Sometimes you have to take into, factor in. You have to take into account that everyone's home environment is not the same in terms of the home office. You have to be flexible in terms of making sure that you allow for interruptions that can happen, etc., etc., etc. And if that's not the topic, then I can park that. But effective and sensitively communicating much more than you would in the case of a physical office, co-located office, is far more important when you're working remotely. But the second important point, which I think Samir wants me to talk about, is this whole notion of metrics and KPIs, etc. Right? And again, all of you on the call, I am sure, have clear goals and outcomes that you have for your business. I mean, without that, you wouldn't be here where you are today. And so the three things that we learned, one was to keep the end goals or outcomes measurable, as simple and as few as possible, because then you're focusing on the most meaningful stuff as the outcome. But everyone understands that the route to get to that outcome requires a process, right? And you do have processes that you have in your own organizations, and the process takes you from point A to point B where you want the outcome to be. And therefore, like the term KPIs, it is these process indicators, the process step indicators, which are in some sense, I would call the early warning signals on whether you will actually meet your end goal or not. And the earlier you get the signal and are able to do the course corrections, the better it is. Because no one wants to get to the end goal and say, oops, I missed it, or I actually didn't really like the outcome that I finally ended up at, because the cost of rework or the cost of not meeting your end goal is far too much, even if you believe that KPIs sometimes appear to be an overhead. Believe me, they're not. But I think some of us learned the hard way that I'd rather have that little bit of focus and discipline on establishing this process steps and process indicators rather than go all the way to the end and then miss them, right? So two things on KPIs. One, I would think that whatever process, Ravi talked about different processes that you need to bring to bear, whatever the functions are, sales, product development, project management. In fact, Samir might realize that even for something as, to me, very important as communication, there is a process that you need to put in place from the time you identify what you want to communicate till the communication actually happens. So these process steps bring together people in those intermediate checkpoints where we look at the indicators and the intermediate milestones that we were supposed to track and achieve so that the end goal is actually finally delivered, right? And it's very easy to think of the process steps and figure out what these individual milestones are because people who are coming together to deliver an outcome understand their roles and responsibilities very clearly. And it does take a village. Sometimes it takes a team, maybe small, but it takes people to come together and work together to deliver these outcomes. So for me, the KPIs are far more important than actually making a big plan with big outcomes and goals. Those are important too. But the KPIs are the ones where you need to get together, meticulously plan what those intermediate checkpoints should be in your wisdom. So that if you know that, for example, in the case of sales, if you say that to meet your actual revenue or sales goals, you need to have a pipeline which is 3x at certain point in time. And as the funnel goes down, the 3x can come down to 1.5x when you're at 80% sales stage and everybody understands what that 80% probability means. And you know that if you're not at 300% or not at 150%, you will not meet your sales target. Very simple, right? But the other important thing is the governance, the discipline that it takes to get together and inspect these KPIs regularly, and whatever frequency you think is important and adequate, is the second important aspect of managing teams, tracking KPIs, because KPIs and the inspection or the governance around the KPIs happening, and when, as I said, these are early warning signals, when you believe that they are off the mark, those are the checkpoints where you need to take decisions, course corrections. Course corrections cannot happen once you reach the end goal. Course corrections can happen while you are in the process of getting towards your goal, and that's what makes KPIs super important. I'm going to stop here because I don't want to take the entire time just sort of talking, and I'm sure there'll be questions which I can answer later. But to me, these are the two important things. Having the KPIs established as process steps and milestones with numerical, measurable, tangible outcomes, and inspecting them and taking course corrective decisions early enough at every stage is finally what will help you to get to the end goal. That's my personal experience, something that I practiced for over 15, 20 years. So Samir, back to you.
Yeah, no, the great thoughts, and thank you for sharing that. Ravi. I think I'm also seeing some questions which are coming up, and we'll make sure that those questions are taken up, in between or towards the end of the webinar. But one question that I want to put it back to you, Ravi, to you, Amit, and then maybe Ravi can share his thoughts on the same topic. I want to check with you, Amit, on generally the setting of these KPIs. Well, I have been part of a startup, like I was working in a startup. I don't think I have the guts to be an entrepreneur. So hats off to all the entrepreneurs on the call. You guys are doing an amazing job. So the overhead part of it, and thinking that KPIs is not something that we don't have to think now. It's something that it's a corporate thing. So if you can share your thoughts on the fact that is it, how relevant is it for startups, and should they actually in the early stage of the startups and whatever stage should they start thinking about KPIs whenever, even when they're struggling with setting up the product and stuff like that. So the relevance of KPIs, which is considered more of a corporate thing, and how relevant it is to startups. You want to just
Yeah. So Samir, I think it's, and now I'm working with 3 startups very hands-on, very actively. I realize it's actually even more important for 2 simple reasons. The cost of or the actual cost of missing a goal or cost of rework if you didn't get to the goal that you set is far more dear to a startup who are always very, very prudent in their cost management, who are always, in some sense, cash strapped, rather than a big company like, say, a Microsoft, who can sometimes absorb the cost of missing out goals. I think the startups definitely have that as one of the most important factors to consider. And if you look at any other efficiency metrics that you would say, a startup has to have those far more intentionally and in a more disciplined way that they need to inspect as much, if not more than larger companies. And believe me, it is not so much of an overhead. It's a way of life. It becomes part of the DNA once you start doing it. For example, we have in one of the startups that I'm doing, we have set these 4 weeks. We are actually going to take the time to completely overhaul a product, right? And so therefore, the amount of work that we are doing now, honestly, and everyone is working remotely. About 40 of us are dev guys. All of us are working remotely. Some people are in Tirupati, some in Vijayawada, some in Hyderabad. But the amount of time that we're spending together and the outcome that we have set as a goal for ourselves is probably the most ambitious that we have done in the history of the startup. And the only way we are able to do that is to have clear KPIs. In fact, we have something that we track even daily. And people who are in dev, Anand, Raghu, you'll understand that there are daily builds and daily runs and daily outcomes that any product company has to look at. And it's not too difficult to do that. Once you set a plan, whatever your methodologies are, once you set a plan, if you have a KPI, set of KPIs established that you feel comfortable with when you set the plan, that if I hit these KPIs daily, weekly, monthly, I think I can get to the end goal, then that becomes a far more not just effective way, but also a great way of getting the team together to have that sense of purpose to say that, look, together we know this is what we have to do on a daily, weekly basis, and we'll meet the end goal. I think for a startup, it is even more important than, as I said, any other larger company or a multinational. While I'm not saying it's not important to them, and we have a lot to learn from them, I think the application of that knowledge to the startup world is something that I'm finding hugely important.
No, I think that's true, and I think I've realized that startups who invest in some of these basic setting their systems in the starting of their when they're just starting up are actually the ones which have found it much easier when they come to a stage where they're really going out and going through the whole growth stage and funding and all that. If they're more stable with their systems and processes and all that, I think even the folk, there's a lot of strength that it brings to the team. I think another thing, maybe before I go to the startup founders and ask their thoughts on some of the things, maybe your thoughts on this. Also have a couple of founders on the entrepreneurs on the webinar who are not from a tech background, technology company, they're manufacturing companies and stuff like that. So to me, it seems that the KPIs are irrespective of which sector that startup is from. But again, maybe something like managing teams remotely might be a challenge more for say other sectors. So any thoughts on that, Ravi, that you want to share on?
Yeah, I think as far as the KPIs are concerned, I think they are or even goal setting and monitoring your progress, that is applicable across the board. The way you would set it up and the way you would monitor it obviously will differ quite a bit. So it's something that it's beginning to become more and more closer to a lot of the things that are happening even in the tech side. To a lot of the machinery is getting IoTized. People are getting a lot more savvy with using some of the technology that is available to them, productivity tools, calendaring tools, and so forth. That if they choose not and want to do it in a slightly different way, which would only allow if they were physically present. Obviously, that is something. There are methods in being able to do that. There are several members of CII today in Hyderabad that we are talking to and working with. which are actually using, certain things that we probably would say is more like an IT practice. It's not our practice, so we're beginning to see that, there are applicability of a lot of these things in those. And also the fact that most people now carry smartphones, and their ability to actually be digitally connected to a lot of these things continue to be there. So I think, we need to talk about specifically what are they looking for and how is it that we can do for them. But, definitely there is a possibility of doing at least 50 to 60% of what we would easily apply, or naturally apply to a tech company.
Great. No, and I think to add to that also on, addressing some of the issues, which, because I'm sure some of the startup entrepreneurs and founders would be thinking, that, to invest in tools, it's like, I think Amit brought it up also, is that I think tracking and governance around this is important. But again, I think that can still happen with most basic tools like, your Excel sheets and stuff. Start there. Of course, there are a lot of these tools available which are free also, which again, as startups at being, people were prudent about cost and all that. There are many such tools available, Trellos of the world and Asanas of the world, to manage your flows and KPIs and track them properly. So I don't think that we should get bogged down by what tool to use for it. It's, I think, the intent of breaking, sitting together, coming with a common goal, breaking it down to the KPIs at the org level, and then to team levels, and then further into individual levels, is that exercise. But I'm also would be interested to know, maybe from Raghu or Anand, on if they have done this exercise in their startup, and if there any process that they followed, or they're looking at doing something like this in their startup. So maybe I'll go with Anand.
Sure, Samir. For past 3 years, I think in the startup, we have been working primarily remotely. Though the 3 founders, we are based out of Hyderabad, we have around 15 member team that is spread across the world. We actually primarily use consultants, and they work with us because we are building a deep tech product. So getting all the tech talent at one place is difficult. So we work with a lot of people. Some are in Kiev, some are in the US, some are in spread over between Delhi, Bangalore, and Hyderabad and Vizag. So a lot of people working from their home offices and things like that. So one of the early lessons we learned, or we got into, was how do we get this the whole like Amit was saying, right? How do we get this whole process together? How do we measure the progress that we are making? The other thing that is the first casualty of remote working teams, if you're not careful about it, is the lack of trust, or the trust that doesn't get built between them, right? So in a way, KPIs are a good way to actually bring it together, because you're actually all being focused on one particular goal, which is quantifiable, which is measurable, and everybody's kind of contributing to it, and you're transparently seeing how that KPI is actually moving. So if you're doing some work, is it moving the needle, and are you making some positive progress, right? So that was the first set of few things that we had to do. Like we started with Excel spreadsheets, but today I think you have amazing products out there in the market, which are kind of very economical, and some of them are most of them are free, where a startup can actually get started, and the whole thing is called Agile Performance Management, right? So they actually give you by sector metrics and KPIs that you can be actually tracking, and how you the process you build around those KPIs, and see that everybody's having a voice. Their voice is heard. They are actually collaborating around the KPIs also. So one of our customers actually does an Agile Performance Management tool as well, which they deploy into retail industry and also into core HR. So both are two different domains, but they actually have KPIs which are tailor-made for those industries, which they're actually taking in and deploying it over large population. That is almost like 10,000 employees, 5,000 employees who are actually using these KPIs, and all are aligning together. And I would again reiterate what Amit said, that is, for startup, these things are make or break in a way, because we have far less resources and far less, I would say, safety net a Microsoft or a Oracle or maybe a Google can actually miss 3 quarters or 4 quarters, and they won't even feel pinch. Maybe they'll lose, some amount of their stockpile of cash, but they will survive. A startup would be wiped out. So, in a way, emphasis on, matrices which everybody can, which are resonating with their value system, for the startup's value system and core goals, and which is in a way building trust between all of the team members. They are the best KPIs, and the startup should get them in place, and they should rally behind it and work and build their entire processes around it. And there are tons of tools out there which can actually help. And people are realizing this because with the customer I was talking about, they are actually building this tool initially for retail industry and hospitality and also HR. But now they are actually getting a lot of requests from even gig workers. How do you manage a whole lot of consultants? How do you manage a whole lot of gig workers and using the tool and so on? So I think you should go invest in that, spend, get your team on it, put the KPIs and go with it. And I think that's the best investment a startup can do at this time.
Great, Anand. Great insights. So, Raghu, I would ask you to share your thoughts on the same, and also, if you have experience as working with the freelancers and others, and also to how to get that KPIs for them and kind of built into their contract so that it kind of gets it. So this is from a question that I just got online. Is that how do you manage how do you see that analyzing that the KPIs are we're sticking to the KPIs. Once the KPIs are set and all that, we're tracking it. Are we sticking to it? And if there's some course connection required, or what your thoughts on that, Raghu?
Yeah. Hi everyone. So I run GoScale. So we are about a 150 people distributed team spread across the globe with offices in Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Bali. So we have been working remotely over the last 3 years. Very interestingly, I have been a remote engineer over the last 4 years. Did a lot of things in trenches, like even in terms of programming, development, and all. So I think now everybody's talking about remote. That has become a mandatory thing for everyone, given the whole situation as such, right? So we have been picking up remote from a much longer time. So what we have observed is like a couple of things that are very, very crucial in a remote setup compared to a normal co-working or a co-location setup, right? So the trust and the discipline are really, really important for the team to be really productive because discipline is the key factor when you're doing that. So how do you measure the discipline or the output in general of a team or a large organization, right? So you have multiple silos working across. You have a finance team, you have a tech team, you have a, let's say, marketing team, sales team, and all. So you need to make sure each of these teams are aligned and the metrics are clearly defined and really tracked, especially in a remote setup. This becomes much more crucial. So when you are in a co-working setup or a location setup, you know that, okay, so he's logging about 8-10 hours. He's around in an office for 8-10 hours. So that gives you anecdotal evidence that, okay, he's working hard, right? So, but in a remote setup, these things really, really become much more important, especially for freelancers and remote workers, like, who are, so they really have to measure their work. This becomes easier in tech when you have timesheets and tools like that, that helps you to so you also have a lot of tools like figuring out Git, Jira, and all this stuff to figure out how many tickets you have resolved. So there are measurable ways of figuring out how the work has been getting done in terms of tech, but in terms of things like product management or project management or design. So you still so both the quantitative and qualitative aspects, right? So one is the quantitative aspect. You can figure out how many screens are getting done or what's happening. So if you have to really figure that qualitative aspect. So being a product manager, I used to be a product manager before this, like, so when you have to do that user interviews and all, so when you are in a live session, like when you are very close to the customer or user, so you figure out the empathy, you figure out the body language, you figure out a lot of stuff, and also that human aspect is something that's going to be tricky on the remote part, right? So that's something we're trying to cope up with and figure out how to solve those parts. And it's more important in general, just to set the context here, it's very important even for a startup at this juncture, like, especially when they are operating remotely, to set the KPIs, to align the teams correctly on that particular path, like, whatever we as a team we agreed upon, right? So that becomes much more crucial to do that planning. Not only that, even the financial planning, you have to figure out your runways. You have to be much more prudent, much more while not losing the edge on agility. So the advantage as a startup you get that is like you are very agile and you keep running very fast, given that you're not doing that, right? So it's a fine balance that has to be balanced by all the startups that are generally you still have to survive, and at the same time you need to make sure that your experiments are not going waste, right? So that has to be really measured and all this stuff. A couple of things I would like to share with the audience here as well. Like I mean, so things that really working for us, right? So we do keep a lot of experiments being done in the company. Like I mean, so we recently started keeping the Google Hangouts or any collaboration tool, like I mean Zoom kind of tool. When you are in a remote setup, for everybody to be on that particular tool, and you also have the morning and evening Scrum calls. So one is setting up the KPIs, and how do you measure at what frequency you keep measuring them and refreshing them. Like I mean, so how do you do that particular part? That's the other important aspect that becomes very important. So we have a weekly way of doing this in an all hands and a cross team collaboration stuff. So those all becomes very crucial in a remote setup. Like so, I think those are some of the points I would like to add upon to that.
Great. I think that again, I think Raghu, what you've shared towards the end is exactly what I think we have been talking. When we started, is that the KPIs give you that framework, but to keep tracking and keep communicating about it, to kind of make sure even tracking the communication is part of the tracking mechanism. That whether you're doing stand-up calls on a daily basis and other things. But again, I think another thing that you brought up is that that whole aspect that when we are in office, you can see that people are working, or at least that's an impression that you get, and you're kind of okay about it. Now, when you're away, especially as founders and people, and especially as startups, there's always that thing, of productivity. You're always expecting more from your team, and you're not sure whether they're actually giving you the best that they can. Now, that is kind of a very thin line, between that trust and that questioning and that micromanaging part of it. And I think there is that, somebody has also asked this question about how do you see that the team is taking all these measures in a positive way? And again, I think maybe Amit can share that, I think for a corporate, it's kind of expected. You have KPIs, you have to go by this, reviews happen accordingly. But for startups, they're always, the whole setup is on a personal relation, very different kind of a rapport. And suddenly you bring in a process, it's question is, do you don't trust me now? And do you really want to micromanage me now? Where is this whole creativity and going with the flow gone? When you're putting all these processes in place. How do you manage such issues with your team where they think that this is actually a micromanaging technique and you're curbing the whole creativity for which we actually came to a startup? Any thoughts on that, Raghu and Anand, quickly?
Yeah, probably I can go first, Samit. Yeah. So this is a very interesting thing that we are coping up as well, guys, very recently over the last couple of weeks. See, I think it's an interesting mix of couple of things, right? So, we also take a lot of feedback from the employees and people who are working remotely. What are the psychological aspects of going remotely? Like, I mean, so they feel they are alone, they are not connected, they miss that coffee sessions, they miss that team bonding. So there's a lot of factors like that used to happen in a typical traditional office setup. So that's been missing in the remote setup. So what we used to do is like we used to have a typical morning scrum call. Like I mean, it's a half an hour call where everybody used to get onto that, and every department, every team used to run it very separately. So now, as a company, now that we are more tighter with the more disciplined with the KPIs and metrics, and we are also trying to make sure that the metrics are being followed daily. Like I mean, so we have more frequency of interaction, like when some mornings and evenings, and we have more and more over communication is something that we have been doing. So while not losing the trust from the employees, that we are trying to more and more micromanaging that, right? So that is something we have been trying to do. It's actually still a very fine balance that we are trying to figure out how to get that optimistic output there. But I think having that one-on-one conversations with employees and telling them understand. So a couple of employees were initially reluctant. Why should they be part of such meetings? It probably an overload in terms of meetings initially. They felt that why should I be part of so many meetings, so many things, and few things like that. Right? So we need to get on a one-on-one with them. So we need to make them understand why it's very important, especially in a remote setup, why everybody has to be together in that particular context. These are some actions that we took recently to make sure that things are smooth and employees are not feeling left off, or not losing that confidence about the trust and all. Especially startups operate on the trust factor a lot, like when the connections, the bondings and all this stuff, the team bonding, it's very closely knit team in general, right? So these are some things that we have done recently.
Okay.
What I
Anand, your thoughts?
add to that is one of the things to build the trust, I would say, is to actually have events and meetings that are not related to work. That is, we actually use Microsoft Teams a lot. Maybe I'm just a Microsoft fanboy to a point, but we actually have a water cooler channel in our teams where people actually share their news, they talk. It's almost like a virtual water cooler that we have, right? And the second thing is every week we tend to have this, something like a stand-up, but nobody talks business. No KPIs, nothing. We are just talking about how each of us are doing and how we are actually liking the work we do, or what we are actually liking about each other. Did somebody help the other guy, and so on? Because the KPIs and everything provide you a framework, but if you take out the trust, it kind of crashes down. So that's one another thing I would emphasize, that you have something like a virtual water cooler, have that non-business discussions happening, and you build the bond, right? Essentially, the startups work so efficiently because all of the small team is actually super aligned towards one thing, and they have that strong bond. The moment you take that away, the startup is again another. They can't move fast, and they can't actually take the risk, right? It all comes down on, if I have a 4-member team I'm part of, can I trust them that if I fall down, they'll pick me up? It's as simple as that. So if you don't build the trust, the whole game is lost. So
Yeah.
those non-business discussions are as much as key.
Yeah, and I think Ravi in his initial discussion talked about the group that we also have at T-Hub, the casual group, where we actually have finding some talented singers in our team. But again, I think Amit, something we're already reaching towards the end of the time. Maybe we'll extend it by a few minutes because there will be some Q questions we'll take after your thought on this. So Amit, I think something that you would have already, in line with this, expected from in a corporate life, which is a given. But now that in startup, there's something which is you're introducing, and it feels like it's not really a new idea for you, but for many, that's a new idea. So and how to this whole thing of micromanaging and the morale of the team, managing that when you're strictly tracking KPIs and work.
Yeah, so let's start with the example that Anand said, right? So one of the things that we have started, and we also use Teams because I believe it's one of the tools that we are all familiar with, is given the crisis we are in, or given the situation lockdown we are in, we have started a channel where people are constantly updating each other on how they're doing, what they need, do they need help, someone has some connection with something that they can help others with. That has proven to be such an important forum, given that you are anyways now remote, that this tool and the whole getting together virtually is providing a blessing. And it's not just a thing that you can do to help each other, it's also a platform where you can share your thoughts, sometimes even vent, sometimes talk about your frustrations, blah blah blah. So there are many such examples you'll find, Samir, if you go around, that virtually people are now getting innovative on how they can use technology to sort of virtually and remotely connect together. So that's just another example. But coming back to your point about, I personally think, and I've seen both happen in my whatever 30 odd years, the fact that you did not have the tools nor the whole culture of remote working necessarily meant that we were doing meetings, death by meetings and death by PowerPoint, right? I mean, people had to come together at a certain time, and especially God help you if you have distributed teams across time zones. Someone has to come into an office to take a call. That was crazy, okay? And I think I call that micromanagement rather than here where people are being appreciated for their maturity and accountability. You are accountable for delivering something, and as a team we sort of check in with each other. As a team we check in on the progress we are making. As a team we understand that collectively we succeed or fail, and as a team we understand the consequences of success or failure, right? So we know our responsibility as a part of the team, and therefore each one puts his or hand up to say that, look, this is where I need help, or this is where I can help. But the whole micromanagement goes away when you're coming together as a team to deliver team outcomes. So therefore, the balance of, and I heard Raghu saying that yes, there are times that people might feel that we are doing too many meetings, right? As long as the meetings are relevant and people understand the value, and balance that with the flexibility that you get of working from home, right? When we first 4 or 5 years ago, when Microsoft talked about democratization of IT and said that, look, you can work, your office is where you are, right? That's the notion of being flexible and having the flexibility. Today I work from my home, tomorrow I can work from a cafe. Lots of people work from the internet cafes. You can virtually work from anywhere you are, as long as you are accountable and you understand your deliverable, what you're responsible for. I think it's the reverse of micromanagement, right? It's appreciating people's accountability, responsibility, and maturity, and giving them the chance to deliver that without saying, show me physical evidence inside a meeting room, across a project table, and be personally present here to do all of these, right? I think it's actually the reverse. So that's my 2 cents, Samir.
No, I think I agree with you completely. I think it's just that initial hitch that you generally have, once you cross that and you actually see the value, and I think that's where the communication bit that we all have talked about is important to make people understand the value behind this. And the moment they realize it, the moment they see that, it makes so much more sense, to do that. I think we've already kind of, reached the time. It's already 12. So, but again, I think so. I've tried to, maybe some of the questions that I got in the chat, I've tried to kind of ask you through this whole conversation. I would just look at if there is we can take a couple of questions.
Yeah,
I think
let's
they've
take
got,
a couple of live questions if you can.
yeah. So I have, some people have raised their hand. So I'm just thinking, Prashant, can you help us see people have raised their hand and how we can pull them into the conversation? So I've got.
Hi, Dashmant Reddy is live right now. Can you please
Okay.
enable the feed? I think I'm experiencing some difficulty from his network side. So I'll just return the mic from him. I'll just get the next one.
So
Gauresh.
maybe Gaurish, I see
Yeah.
Gaurish.
Hi, Gauresh. Are you able to be here? Hello? Hello, Gauresh?
Okay, let's move on.
Hi, Pradeep. Pradeep Swarup is here. Okay, I think I can't
I'm not
see.
sure if they
Could be,
requested for a mic access, but I'm not sure if they actually have access to, like they have mic. So maybe.
yeah. Okay. So I'm just gonna. Okay, can you please? Okay, one moment, please hold on.
I think there were some good questions in the chat, so maybe we can pick that up as well.
Yeah, so I've tried to answer, ask some of them already through the question, but I'll just quickly go through the set of questions that are there. This. So I think there is some questions which are more detailed, and the people want to actually understand the whole process of how to set a KPI and all that. So maybe this time might be too short for that. So for that, I would request that I think you have access to, the profiles of each one of us, our LinkedIn and otherwise. So feel free to reach out to any any one of the startups or Amit or Ravi or me, and we can maybe try to have a detailed discussion separately.
And Samir, one thing we can do after the call or maybe at the end is for people who are interested, I'm more than happy to share my email account and if they
Sure.
have questions, and maybe others can volunteer to do the same.
Yeah, so I think we can put the email ID. Each one of you can, share your email IDs in the chat box. So if you can just type in your email in the chat box, and if you're open to having people reach out to you.
Yeah, we'll do that. Samir, in addition to that, I was thinking if we have sufficient interest for something where we go into developing KPIs, monitoring them, and all that is as a request that is quite prevalent from this group, we can actually do a webinar specifically on that topic.
Correct. No, I think there is, and I think we will. So we have I think a feedback form that we are requesting each one of you to, people, all the attendees who are there to fill that up. So it will be great to hear, your interest in any of the topics that you want to go deeper in or some other topics, so that we can accordingly plan some more sessions. So we plan to have a series of these sessions on this. So I see another raise a hand. So I think that's not working for the moment. I'll quickly look at some other questions. So again, guys, you don't have to share your email IDs on the chat. I was looking at the panelists if they want to share their email IDs for people to reach out to.
Hi.
Your, I think, contact details you already will have.
Okay, so Samir, one moment. We just had one attendee on the stage. I think looks like the people who are raised hand, they are not allowing the mic and the camera permission, which is why we are not having them here. So I just had one attendee who
Okay.
raised his hand. I'm just going to get somebody. I think Vinutha is here. I'm going to accept her. Hi, Mike. Hi, Vinutha.
Hi,
Okay, so
everybody.
Vinutha is here on the stage.
Yeah, Vinutha, you have a question.
Not so much as a question, but I also wanted to just tell the startups that I'm leaving my email ID. So if you need any mentor connects with respect to refining your KPIs, if you need a one-on-one session, please reach out to me and we will connect you with a mentor. I was basically testing why this is not working. So, but yeah.
Samir, I think we are not able to see her or hear. I can see Ravi.
Okay, okay.
So you maybe refresh the page. But I saw Amit has shared Amit Sarkar 65 at live.com. Raghu is Raghu at goscale.com. Ravi is ravi.narayan at t-hub.co. Vinuta is vinuta.rolapalli. And mine is samir.shabra. So we'll be able to share that with you. I think again, guys, Anand is Anand at ideance.io. So I think we'll have to, of course, looking at the limitation of the time in this, maybe we'll have to wrap this session. But I think it looks like a very relevant session for the startups, and there is an interest definitely there. So we can definitely look at doing a deeper dive session later. But again, please keep your sharing your feedback, and we'll make sure that there are many more sessions to come which are more relevant for you guys. So keep tuned to our social channels. Most of them, the handles are thub HYD, THUB is our Twitter handle, are on LinkedIn and Facebook. So keep plugged into that. Make sure you fill up the feedback form that you will soon get. I think, Prashant, I think we're good to wrap it for now.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
So before I do that, of course, I really want to thank all the panelists who were there in the call. Amit, Raghu, Anand, and Ravi, of course. Thank you for being part of this panel and sharing your insights and wisdom with the startups. I think this is the right time for the whole innovation ecosystem to come together to each other, support each other in whatever way possible. And I think sharing our knowledge and wisdom is the least that we all can do. So let's keep this going. And thank you for all your time and effort. Prashant, over to you.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I just saw a chat request to extend the session. So I'm sure everybody really loved the insights from Amit, from Ravi, from Samir, Anand, and Raghu as well. And it was a great moderated panel discussion. So thank you very much. And just a small request from the team here is we will be sharing a feedback link on the chat, as well as you will get it on the email. Just it's a request from us to share the feedback about the session, about the panelists, and you already have the details of email IDs of all the panelists. Please reach out to them and the team T-Hub for any mentoring related queries or questions. I'm sure they're one of the most respected people in the ecosystem. Okay, so thank you very much. Ravi, would you like to end this on a closing note? Over to you.
Sure. Yeah. So thank you guys for joining us on this webinar. It was very helpful for us to get a sense of the questions that are coming from the ecosystem, which also helps us structure the series of webinars that we're going to do over the next several days, several weeks. I think this is a time, as I said, for us to restructure ourselves and strategize for the future. So all of these discussions are helpful, as much as it is a little difficult for us to stay in one place confined. But it's also a time for us to use the stillness around us to really reflect upon what are important things for our startups, what are the important things for us as individuals, what do we want to accomplish, and where do we would like to take our future. So we would love to continue to make these discussions happen for you. And in the meantime, if you have any specific requests that we can answer, there could also be a one-on-one discussion that we can facilitate. So please do take advantage of it. You are on a fantastic journey. There's huge amount of respect among all of us for you guys taking on this entrepreneurial stint, and there's nothing much more than us to be there for you as you make this transition into the next normal state that will emerge in the next few weeks. So look forward to continuing this collaboration. Thank you.
And
Sameer, any
guys,
closing
stay
remarks? Yeah.
home, stay safe. Very important. I said stay home, stay safe, guys. When you're looking at business and all that, take care of yourself also and your loved ones around you. So do that. Thank you.
Okay, so
Take care,
we're
guys.
just
Bye.
ending this. Let's have a round of applause. You can click on those emotion icons here. Round of applause for our expert panelists. And special round of applause to Sameer for a wonderfully moderated session. I loved it, Sameer. And let's have more sessions on Airbeat. Okay, thank you very much and have a good day, a safe day as in times ahead for everybody. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Raghu. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Anand.
Thank
And
you.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone.
Bye bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.